That's funny. So that's kind of cute.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So we have, who do we have on the call? Vitsi?
Yeah.
And then and Andre. Okay, good. We got some people showing up. It's cool.
Excellent. And
Yep.
Weedsy, I don't believe I've seen you for a long time, so a pleasure to see you again.
I am lurking on the calls, but I usually don't talk a lot.
I know that. That's why I called you out by name, to drag you into the conversation and just force it upon you. I'm just,
Well, thank you. But I do know about people, not myself, but who went to a conference in Europe. Everybody was very happy that they could, and then they all had COVID.
I think that society is like super exhausted with COVID and trying to get back to normal. And I think part of this is like we're getting to whatever the new normal is, right? Like, Anyway, yep. Welcome all those who are coming. We have no agenda. This is meant actually for the participants to ask questions as much as it is for us to sit here and talk about it. So,
we do have an agenda, though, technically speaking.
Oh, well, okay. I apologize. Agenda, I meant in a small a agendas, and like I don't have an agenda of things I'm trying to drive, but I'm sure people are more organized than me.
Yeah, if I may interrupt real quick, one phrase that I think has been helpful is the phrase "office hours." I find that actually a mentally helpful phrase. They come with questions. We don't know all answers, but we may know some, and the opportunity for that conversation.
I've also had a few conversations in Slack with people who are maybe not able to attend today, but interested in sort of seeing a little bit more information and sort of digestible in other ways of like what we're doing in Alpha Omega. So I'll start by saying, when I distill it down to its absolute, purest essence, Alpha Omega is about seeing how well we can turn money into security quickly. More money, more security, more quickly, which money works, and doing more of that. The action item that is on our plate, number one, is hiring people to actually do that work so that Michael and I are not doing it in our volunteering time with Jory's and David's and other people's help on a regular basis. And then the first action item of that is to document the work that we're doing and how we're doing it so that people can actually read and benefit from and contribute to how we're doing it. And we acknowledge that there's more that we can publish. So that feedback is well taken and very much in line with what we want to do. Michael, do you want to add anything to what I said?
+1 for that. I mean, we are, so we announced the node engagement 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago.
Yep.
Mid last month. So that was the one that we couldn't really talk about last month at this call. So we have that one. More to come there. We do want to have periodic check-ins with the node team and documented like artifacts of like what, like specifically like what are they doing for this. So that'll come, I would imagine by next month this time, we'll probably have more of that information.
I would agree with that. Yep.
Yeah.
I can add just on that. I had hoped to be able to come to this meeting with an update from our first meeting with the node, the node team that we've secured. That was supposed to be on May the 4th. We had a tragedy this last week in the LF family, and so that was canceled and rescheduled for May the 11th. So that's when the node team will be meeting to discuss the metrics and framework that will be reporting out to Alpha and to OpenSSF.
Thanks, Troy.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what's going on with Alpha. We do have a couple other, let's say, engagements in the hopper. They're not at the point where we want to talk about them, But I would expect over the next, let's say 8 weeks, 8 or 10 weeks, to have more good stuff announced. On the Omega side, we're trying to move in with something, because without having a security analyst, an engineer hired to do the work, it's kind of hard to, like Alpha's easier for us to like write a check and get something done. Omega kind of needs hands-on. So we started an experiment this week to run a bunch of security tools against a bunch of open source projects. And if the results come back completely clean, meaning no one needs to triage anything because there's nothing to triage, then we automatically publish a security review to the security reviews project. It's an experiment. We'll see what goes on with that. I have a pull request with, I think, 15 or so of these initial reviews, just to say, like everything else having to do with this, it's an experiment. So that's what's going on there. You guys have any questions, topics, anything else? Like, how can we, what do you want to talk about?
I have a lot of things to talk about with y'all, but I get you many times.
Question. Can third parties visit this 11 May meeting?
Can you participate in the May 11 meeting? That's a great question. That is a meeting with the Node TSC and the security staff that the Alpha Omega project has helped us secure. I think they are looking to keep that closely held to the TSC at this point, but we'll be reporting out really soon thereafter what the outcomes of that meeting are, and then open it up to the broader community, because one of the objectives here is to facilitate more participation in node security from the broader contributor base and all of that. So the answer is probably not for the May 11th meeting, but very probably for things thereafter. And the May 11 meeting will kind of generate what that looks like.
We may want to actually invite someone representing Node to this meeting.
I like that.
As a regular thing, and they can show up when they can, but we'll do that for all the Alpha projects.
That's a great idea.
One more question. What constitutes vulnerability in case of Node.js? Because it's kind of a platform. So is every function which can be misused is a vulnerability?
No. So for Node, we're particularly looking for two things. Number one, how is the Node project handling security? So if you report a vulnerability to the Node project and they drop it on the floor, or they are really slow to respond, or they're just overworked, like improving that to get that vulnerability fixed in a more rapid way, whatever the vulnerability is. These are vulnerabilities, though, in the Node runtime or the packaging around that or anything. Like, it's not random NPM projects, nor is it like the V8 runtime. It's just the stuff that the Node folks are responsible for.
I think that's correct.
But
maybe I think it's also about the Node engineering community in terms of up-leveling their security practices so that they are not requiring every engineer contributing to Node to know all the security practices, but still elevating the security practices in terms of how they are able to catch those problems sooner or fix them faster.
So a great example would be making sure that static analysis and fuzzing and whatever else is needed is well integrated into their processes, as an example.
No, what I meant is that if, for example, someone can pass some parameter to a JavaScript function, which will cause a Node.js runtime crash, will it constitute automatically? Will it be automatically considered as vulnerability, even if this parameter is usually not user controlled?
It depends on the context.
Yeah, I think the real answer to your question here is we're not the people to answer that question. And I would say that right now, Node doesn't have to their level of satisfaction, and certainly we'd encourage them to have more, a well-defined process for deciding whether that's a vulnerability or not, and set of principles that help them make that decision. And I think also process for actually dealing with it when they do decide it's a vulnerability. So there's all those dimensions that they want to be better. And by the way, I don't want to be damning them with faint praise. They're doing an awful lot as it is every year. There's a lot of smart people working across it, but our goal right now is to give them a dedicated resource to really up level across the org what they're doing. So your question is entirely relevant, and needs to become a conversation within the Node community, not ours. We're here to, talk about how we're enabling that conversation rather than trying to solve that particular question.
I do think that's an interesting question, in that, one thing that we might learn how to do better out of this process is like where to surface and to whom to surface things. Because that's a question that we get at TC39. Is this an issue with the spec? Is this an issue with the browser? Is this an issue? And so we I think we'll start to learn more about how we can map out that space for developers when they run across problems and where to report.
Jerry, I think you're 100% correct. And I think part of our intent about working with Node and other projects and foundations is to broaden our organizational awareness of the challenges and patterns here. Is Alpha Omega going to solve the vulnerability management lifecycle and, or disclosures lifecycle? No. Are we going to be part of the conversation with the working groups and other foundations that are dealing with it? Absolutely.
May I jump in real quick?
Yeah, there's a hand raised as well, so I wanted to make sure we didn't try that.
Yeah,
go ahead, Jordan.
Okay, sure, thanks. Yeah, so I just like that particular question. I think the problem in the whole security industry is that the nuance required to answer that question is rarely applied. The NPM ecosystem sees a ton of CVEs that are, in my opinion, should never have been CVEs. They're self-attacks. Anything that requires you to attack yourself is not a vulnerability. And like, I think, so my concern is more on the Omega side of it than the Alpha side of it. But like, I think getting these resources built up in Node, for example, and creating a well-established experts and like precedent of applying this nuance will really help the long tail of the ecosystem have something to look to and to follow, to be able to make more properly nuanced decisions about this sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that, Jordan, I totally agree. I would love for us to be able to start to, and I realize a lot of soft words, of be able to start to eventually get to the end state we want is a sort of progression of guidance, playbook, process, tooling, trusted tooling to manage the decision flow and the actual disclosure of, these things. Like, and for that to be something that is fully transparent across the space in terms of people know how these decisions are reached, can understand how these decisions are reached, without necessarily seeing the, the vulnerability being disclosed before we've actually had the conversation. Because we have, like we said many times, we really don't want to be a bank of 0 days anywhere, right? But sooner or later, there's going to be a pile of stuff flowing through some system, right? You don't also want it to be, Bob from accounting has a piece of paper with the 0 day written on it. So what is the right operational model for the industry writ large? And I think most likely we're going to end up where the foundations start to become the right locus of control for that within their space, but with support, maybe tooling support, and definitely process and experience and guidance from joint experiences across the OpenSSF. So David, we cut you off and you wanted to say something.
Yeah, so yes, but now I've discovered how to raise my hand. I did know how to do that, I just didn't. So all right. That earlier question kind of triggered a thought, which is, I think in general for security from development through distribution writ large, but one of the things I certainly encourage is in general trying to think systematically, trying to identify what seems to happen over and over again. Is there a systematic way we can prevent that in the future? There is no way Alpha Omega can do all things. That's just not reasonable. There are some things Alpha Omega can do, and it's what's the hand? Oh, I see. Well, I guess that is another system. But you know, obviously there are things that it is scope to do, and hooray for that. I think I'm expecting that as Alpha Omega goes through, they're going to identify some other systemic issues, and then they will raise that over probably to, you know, if there's an existing working group, say, hey, go, can I talk you into working on that? Or if there really isn't a home, maybe bringing it up to the TAC and saying, I've noticed a systemic issue. You know, so, you know, no project, no individual can do everything. But it's okay to identify these ideas as systemic issues. And if it's not in scope within this, that doesn't mean it's dead. That just means that, hey, we're going to try to make sure that at least it's raised. And if there's agreement that, in fact, that's a problem, that those other pieces can get worked on. I've had a whole bunch of discussions of different issues and things, including, you know, gee, why are all these problems within NPM? Well, there are reasons, but there are also opportunities, and you know, and so I think there's ways to, even if they're not going to be addressed within Alpha Omega specifically, that doesn't mean they get ignored. It just means we need to find other homes for them. Thanks.
Perfect. I'm going to draw on Bitsy, who's raised his hand as well.
We'll lower the hand now because the chair is acknowledged. I think it was one of the Michaels who mentioned something about having a collection of 0 days.
In my workers, do I have a collection of 0 days? I don't want a collection of 0 days. I don't want to have them. Yeah, but yeah.
But that was the intro to my comment. I have a bit of ancient history to share, and it goes back to the late 1980s. When there was an internet forum and there was a lot of damage on the internet. In the years after, there was a little ecosystem of incident response and security teams first that developed. And so they basically were teams at vendors, the producers of software, and teams that were general, like CERT Coordination Center in Pittsburgh. That model might work for the alphas like NPM and so on, but it would never work for the omegas, the really small, the projects that to my surprise get included into into a lot of places, but they're basically run by one guy or by one girl, and so there's not going to be a security expert on that team.
Yep. And it's
but there is this middle area where somebody can be a mediator for security problems.
I think that's
so they will. Yeah,
you're on the right track there. I think that this is where different foundations will play more assertive and supportive roles, right? It's, you just look across the different major foundations. Not everything is in Linux Foundation. There's really important projects, and each of them actually have their own flavor of like what the foundation does, supports, centralizes, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Without knowing what I'm talking about, though, I'm imagining that, you know, there are some interesting things, like essentially vulnerability life cycle, like vulnerability disclosure as a service, without even knowing what that means. But imagine like you know, if you think about any small business, right? They don't have the size capacity to have their own retail system. They use a point of sale as a service thing from one of the many vendors like that. And it provides an awful lot of operational security for them. They don't have to worry about managing these things and doing it right.
Yep.
And I'm now, just because of this conversation, starting to imagine what would it look like for us to have a, you know, a stack of capabilities that go all the way from here's a bunch of open source components that you can run to help yourself manage it for yourself, up to vulnerability disclosure as a service run by some, you know, funded entity out of one of the many things, right? And there's a spectrum there that's kind of interesting.
Yep. Now, finding a good model is the challenge. All right.
You guys don't have to raise your hands. You don't have to ask a good question, any question, or even just don't have to make your question in the form of a statement or a statement in the form of a question. Just speak your mind. That's why we're here.
So is it accurate to say that this node partnership is like it's like the first thing of its that we're doing here, but I guess, so I like the alpha omega concept because it kind of covers the long tail, which is often ignored. But I also think the long tail is much more important and much harder to target in the sense that if there's a security issue in Node, let's say, there's a lot of people and a lot of companies and a lot of money already paying attention to that. And it's great that there's some money injected to centralize that in Node Core itself, of course. But I am the sole maintainer of over 10% of NPM's download traffic. That's a lot of security responsibility to rest with the whims of an individual who is paid virtually nothing for that.
So I would argue that by nature of being responsible for 10% of NPM traffic, you probably qualify as a critical project or as a critical entity, in which case,
sure,
like I wouldn't like, and no promises, like don't quote me on it. This is being recorded, but whatever. Like it would make sense on paper, at least, to have a conversation with you about, what do you need?
Right.
So,
and I mean, I would certainly appreciate that attention and I would like, but not because of the impact it has on me, a fully employed, full-time employed engineer, although I wouldn't turn down my fair share of whatever contributions there were, but more because there are many other individuals who are similarly critically positioned, who are wildly underfunded and who may not have a similar employment. And so I want to use, again, I'm not going to turn down my fair share, but I want to use my access to advocate for that traditionally under-addressed group. And I see the same with Open Collective, Patreon, GitHub sponsor stuff. Everyone knows about like Webpack and Babel and TypeScript and ESLint, but like nobody knows about the 3,000 developers whose pieces contribute to that. And so I'm really pleased that the Omega part's in there. So I guess this all rambly leads back to my question. It kind of doesn't matter which one is first. You have to do something first, but like, what's the next step? Is it going to be on the other end so that we can kind of?
So I want to try. I think there's a misconception that you're working from, and if I'm wrong, we'll go from there. But Omega, like Alpha Omega, is not a. First of all, it's an experiment. So everything we do, we're doing small and learning how it works and seeing what things like that. And so, if you're going to turn money to security, which things work well. And also pragmatically, where we don't have humans yet to our jobs, so we're going to do things that can leverage other people's ability to find humans. But I don't think that there is a future in which Alpha Omega, and this is perhaps a strong statement, I am not currently on a path where the Omega piece of Alpha Omega becomes a funding vehicle to ensure that that long tail of projects that all deserve more resources get those resources. That's not the goal of Omega.
Sure.
And I think that there are separate OpenSSF conversations and many large organizations who are very much worried about the problem you're describing.
Right. And while I agree with you, I wasn't assuming that was the goal of OpenSSF's project here. It wouldn't be reasonable to expect OpenSSF to be the funding source, period. Right. But security, I see it as a precondition for security here that a critical maintainer has levers on them to do the right thing, so that if they have a bad day or a disastrous week or something, they can't violate a bunch of security best practices. Some of the more high profile incidents recently have been because there wasn't enough incentive for them not to do it, or because of mental illness. And I won't,
So everything you're saying is true. You know, it's a fundamental principle of getting big things done with organizations is smaller teams know what their boundaries are and other teams and like that. But you're raising a thing which is keeps coming up in conversations. It'll come up next week at the White House summit as well, around how do we, as an industry, right, address that problem? Because you can't, and honestly, it's not even a question of just giving enough money to those people, because one of the fundamentals is being a security person is not the same thing as being a person who can write good, whatever code it is, right?
Right.
And so there's a different set of skills, and applying those at scale, right? There's a non-fungibility of human resources. Not you could say we're going to apply a lot of humans to 1,000, like, even if it's just JavaScript, right?
Right.
Content switching is not a viable path. And so there's a lot of really, honestly, pretty hard problems ahead.
Absolutely. And I'm not implying that money solves these problems. I'm implying it's a precondition for solving them, because we exist in capitalism, and thus money has to be present for people to have the Maslow hierarchy freedom to focus on security.
Yes, happy to agree with that. Go ahead.
I was gonna, so if I take my Alpha Omega hat off and put on my OpenSSF more generally hat on, what would you need if and it's not really about you and your projects in particular, but as much as you represent maintainers that single maintainers that maintain a lot of stuff.
Yeah, Michael, I'm going to leave you hanging and drop. I have a conflict.
Go for it.
Good luck with this conversation. Jordan, it's a pleasure chatting with us as well.
Thanks for your help.
What are the challenges that you have that could be solved with, let's just say we have a magic wand. What would that magic wand do?
Yeah, I mean, I have somewhat of a unique situation, I think, but in general terms, I have never had the option to quit my job and full-time work on open source. Okay. The number of critical open source developers that have that option is probably in the single digits, period, not just in JavaScript. And I like my job. I'm not asking for someone to give me enough money to quit. But it's never even been possible. So it seems so I get some money from sponsorships and stuff right now, and it's enough that I feel better about the work I'm doing, that people value it, but it's not enough that so in other words, what I'm thinking is all the stuff that I do around proper maintenance, which includes security, is stuff that I do because I feel ethically obligated to do it, because I have altruistic goals for that. The economy and safety of companies and countries shouldn't rest on my altruism in any way. And the way things work in capitalism is that people are paid to do jobs because the threat of losing that money ensures that they're going to do a good thing. There's a lot of things you can get fired for that aren't criminal, but you don't do them, even if you don't have any ethical boundaries, because you want to keep getting the paycheck. And similarly speaking, open source maintainers need enough of a carrot so that the cost benefit analysis of doing unethical things, so that the calculus changes and it no longer becomes an option. For example, if someone wants to make a protest with their software, they might think it's the right thing, but that calculus is going to be quite different if that would threaten a large chunk of income. And there's a bunch of philosophical debate one could have about that, but if one accepts capitalism as a given, then that is something we want money to be a lever, because that's how it works. So I guess my magic wand would be if every company donated 0.01% of their profit, not even revenue, to the open source software that is part of their stack. I feel like we would no longer be having discussions about, is there enough money in open source? We would be having discussions about what's the best way to channel it.
So I was thinking about it, Jordan, as you were talking. I think you're right. Some of it is I'm receiving enough from support from my Patreon community to feel okay with the 5 hours of extra labor I give to the project on the weekend, but not enough to feel okay if the hell of the internet is coming down on me because something happened and my package was exploited. And now, you know, everybody's looking at me, the maintainer of this, to deal with it. And, you know, and you're certainly not getting compensated to deal with that, and the maintainers may not also have the resources available to deal with such an incident either. And I think that's where sometimes you just see these folks put it down and walk away and say, not my problem anymore, y'all deal with it. And I think that's probably a more frequent occurrence than somebody saying, I'm actually just not getting paid enough to do this, so you know, peace.
I think it's interesting. I think perhaps I'm just thinking out loud here, so this may be a terrible thought, but perhaps the altruism that drives so many open source maintainers is in some ways working against them, because if the normal like the way this worked was, you know, someone found a terrible vulnerability in a project and the maintainer said, great, it'll cost $30,000 for me to fix this. Here's the link. As soon as it hits $30,000, I'll publish a release. Like, I wonder what that would, I mean, I don't, because we are where we are, I don't see a road of getting from here to there, but it'd be interesting in like a parallel universe if things had developed that way, where it was much more you know, financial incentives and transactional, and, you know, oh, you want a new version of this? You want this feature? The feature's $500. Like, that's the cost of it. In which case, there is more of a, well, the incentives are just different.
There was an experiment like that in the standards space. Let me see if I can find it. It was Igalia did it, where basically they were saying, you know, here are a few different ideas for improvements we can make to these different web APIs. If we receive funding on the Open Collective for X amount of dollars, we will go do those. And people could pledge with their bank account to see it come for open prioritization. That's what it's called. I'll put a link to it.
Oh, Rita, you're on mute.
I'm on mute.
Oh, your headset is up, so I don't think we're here.
It should.
Your microphone needs to be swiveled down.
Microphone is up
on the side of your headset. Yeah, there you go.
No, but it's using the wrong mic. It's supposed to use this microphone, but it doesn't. All right.
You know.
Good. I'm still intrigued by the omega end of the spectrum, where order of one, maybe two persons are you know, creating the software, and it ends up being used in unexpected places. So one crazy idea would be to sponsor people to just go out and fix this. I've noticed that that the software that I wrote ends up being scanned by Coverity and all those other products, because, well, they want to do a good thing and get some recognition too, but they don't really fix all the problems. They just, you know, they do things that maybe I should have done anyway. But yeah, finding ways and models to address that other end of the spectrum, that is, I think, an intriguing problem.
Yeah, and so the approach that we are at least taking initially is, you know, I think it's easier to experiment with a closed group where, you know, as a full-time hire, this is their, you know, we know we're getting 40 hours a week of you know, triage and fixes and reporting and whatnot. It's come up very frequently on like, where does this intersect with like bug bounty, patch bounty? Like, how can we leverage the community in such a way that we disclose like in a responsible way and avoid just an enormous overhead of, that would manage that. At some point, though, like I don't think that like Omega is not going to scale to 100 security or 1,000 security researchers. I don't know what the right number that society needs. Maybe the answer is it's a bit of both, where it's some full-time staff and some kind of trusted third parties that are paid by the whatever in terms of getting work done. Yeah.
I have one more question about Node.js.
Yeah.
Will it only cover Node.js on Linux, or will it also cover Node.js on Windows?
I would imagine both. I mean, we haven't. I don't think that's come up. It should just be Node as.
I don't think Node prioritizes. I think Node prioritizes all of its supported operating systems identically. And if you ever see something different, please surface it, because Node will be very interested in not, in fixing that. Including Windows.
Yeah, that raises that. Does Node produce binaries for all operating systems? Because there was like the Node sort, and I'm actually a little bit confused on like who's producing the bits that are running in different environments. I know that like if it's
so the only place Node is officially distributed is their website, which has some binaries. I believe they also distribute Docker images, which may have the same content. Yeah. If I look at the specific, like there's, I don't know, 10 to 15 pre-compiled binaries. It won't cover every operating system in every situation. You have to compile if you're not in one of that list. And then there's a bunch of unofficial places, including Node Source and the default app repo and a bunch of others.
Yeah.
That's the only official sources.
Got it.
Sorry, David has his hand up.
Yeah, no, it's good.
Or I think Jory had first. Jory?
If this takes us away from where you wanted to go, David, I'm happy to save this for another time. But Scovetta, when we think about the support from the engineering hire that the Alpha Omega project will hopefully have soon, how much of what they're going to be doing is thinking about like tooling and this kind of support question for Omega versus other things? Like, I mean, that's actually a good question for me because I'm trying to find these people.
Yeah. So the intent of the two that would be that the engineer and the security analyst like work side by side. The security analyst is, I mean, they both have both engineering and security chops, I guess. But the engineer is more on the triage this, is this vulnerable? How would one fix this? What are the trade-offs? Is this real? All of that stuff. And the engineer, their primary mission is to make the machine that generated that finding for the security analyst to have, no false positives and no false negatives, or at least kind of, so driving that. So and the reason I think that the engineer is critical is, I forgot who said it before, but tools are noisy, and every false positive that pops out is wasted time and money, and every false negative that the tool doesn't find is risk that we are ignorant to. So having those two kind of be a partnership team to continually improve the tools, either in feedback back to the tool authors or new rules or better rules or whatever, to kind of make that happen. So I see both of them being primarily focused on Omega. It's possible that after a year of iteration, the engineer would have cycles freed up to tackle adjacent problems. But I would say for a while, it'll just be on tool tuning. We do want that tool set to be publicly available.
Yeah, if I could jump back, I want to jump back to the previous question about Node and specific platforms. If I recall correct, I don't remember really ever discussing one platform versus another. So as long as it's a platform that Node supports, then I think it's a platform that we would care about because they care about it. I mean, if there's a vulnerability found that only affects one platform, then I would expect that Node would want that fixed. We would want that fixed. Now, I do suspect that if there's any issues, most of them are not going to be specific to a platform, frankly. But you know, I can be proved wrong, and and you know, I think we just want to make sure that we squeeze out as many vulnerabilities as we can, regardless of the platform that folks use it on. At least that's my expectation coming in, and somebody can tell me otherwise.
I would imagine that if Node had like specific work that was targeting a very long tail operating system, so 16-bit Windows. I hope they're not supporting 16-bit Windows, but if they did, and there was a bug that just affected that, and they were like, well, we have this dollar, where should we spend it? We would say not on the 16-bit Windows.
Fair enough. Fair enough. But I think on the more commonly used ones, I think there would be a desire to fix no matter what. And really, so much of Node, it's not. I don't think most of Node is platform specific, frankly, or a lot of it isn't.
I haven't seen a lot of it. I mean, it may be when you get to the V8 stuff, but
well, yes, but I mean that's a separate, separate topic.
Mm-hmm.
I have a different topic if we're ready to change. Well, it's still the same topic, subtopic. Which is, y'all had asked async what kind of like citable data like we could be reporting out to the community that would be interesting. And so I'd like to, I guess, discuss that as a group, like what kind of what facts, what info, what numbers would this group find compelling to learn about from either the alpha or the omega efforts? I mean, there's obviously like social data, but that's maybe not as interesting as some of the security data.
Well, maybe one thing you can report is, for example, some examples of implementing fuzzing. Because I think it's not trivial to do a good fuzzing program. And so such example can be valuable for other projects.
I wonder too if it's just like some like qualitative examples from different projects for a number of different things would be.
Or maybe also, I don't know, some examples of how to improve some tests so that they become, I don't know, test more cases or become easier to read or modify.
I think what was one of the simple metrics that we'd certainly collect is like number of vulnerabilities found and fixed. I think for the alpha projects, having the narrative, via monthly or quarterly kind of updates of, this is what, we've streamlined the build process to blah, blah, blah. And it's, and draw a line to, and this is good for security because, I think that makes sense. I do think we're going to have to, like, maybe if we think ahead 6 months and say, what do we want our, October or November announcement to be on, like, looking back over the first 6 months of Alpha Omega, like we've achieved blah, 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 and kind of start with that and kind of work backwards, or at least to the types of things that we want to do.
Number of Jordan Harbands satisfied.
Yep.
Can never complain about that metric.
I didn't figure you would. But I mean, seriously, like it would be kind of
Yeah.
an interesting thing, taking the like sole maintainer metric of some kind, metrics.
Or maybe
I mean,
number of pull requests which break tests.
Yeah, I mean, I think the trick about talking about single maintainers, and this, I've already brought this up with the security scorecard folks, is nobody's a single maintainer by choice. And so penalizing that does not help anyone.
Yeah.
Incentivizing additional maintainers is the only thing I can think of that would fix that problem. That's to our earlier discussion, that's another thing money can help solve, but not solve alone.
Sorry, go ahead, David.
I'm not sure that no one's a
Right.
hard.
I was gonna
beware.
say-
Let me rephrase. Yeah, the vast in my experience,
Yes.
people are not solo maintainers by choice. They're solo maintainers because they have not yet found anyone with the interest, expertise, and stamina to join them.
And if I may add, the trustworthiness, because
And trustworthiness, absolutely.
and indeed, we've seen a few cases where they found someone, but the new someone was there because they wanted to be malicious, not because they were actually wanting to be helpful. So,
Right.
yeah, but you know, with those caveats, I agree with you, and it doesn't. I think there are ways to solve it. It comes back to we need to think systemically. Not all problems can be solved with AO, but we certainly shouldn't ignore that problem. Completely agree with you.
I wonder, so in the, number of Jordan satisfied per month metric, which I'm gonna have to start using. Like, what I'm suspecting is that there are a relatively small number of individuals like you that maintain a vastly outsized impact on the relative ecosystem.
Right.
So if, just as a hypothetical, if there was a security resource that was dedicated, and we'll take you and 11 others like you, so we'll have the dozen like core maintainer supergroup, and we had a dedicated security resource for you, for this group, that was at your disposal for 40 hours a week, fully funded, would that help? Because I'm also imagining that you wouldn't need a security resource like in a continual basis. It'll be choppy, but it'll be choppy for a lot of people. So average it out over time. Like, would that significantly solve problems, or would that?
It would, with a caveat, which is that, or a condition, which is that such an entity would need to have demonstrated a repeated long history of balancing maintainer needs sufficiently in a way that the current security industry very much does not do.
Okay.
So it would have to be better than all current security experts. And, the majority of them, shouldn't be too absolutist, but, and in that case, maintainers would then have trust and rapport with this group such that it was a fluid and efficient exchange of information at the appropriate times.
So David is making a crack about a high council of maintainers, but honestly, I'm not so sure that's a bad idea. I think that might be kind of an interesting idea to get, y'all together at some point, because I'm sure that there's information, and like just ideas that could be generated from that group, one. And two, there's probably a percentage of packages out there that we could say, all right, like this class, like y'all have packages you're not supporting anymore, like that should be.
Well, and also there's somebody who has an outsized impact on the ecosystem is likely to be vocal about some things, and people vocal about some things are likely to generate interpersonal conflicts at times. And it is in everyone's best interest that the folks eligible for this council or whatever are able to freely share information in a neutral venue, even when such interpersonal conflicts exist. I've seen many examples of high-profile maintainers having little spats about things, and creating a norm where those spats can continue, but they can still show up in one neutral place and kind of commune on important things around security or maintenance best practices and things like that. And that seems like a valuable thing to have.
Yeah, if I may jump in, we mentioned NPM a couple times. The challenges of single maintainer projects and so on happen everywhere. I think for various systemic reasons, it's way more common in NPM, and we can talk about some of the systemic pressures that lead to that. But I think part of it is just there's a general social expectation that in NPM the packages are much smaller, which encourages single maintainers, and finding a way to overcome that so that it's not a single burden on someone, I think is wonderful. But I should note, by the way, that Jordan was crediting me for the High Council of Maintainers. I was really just doing a small riff on Jordan's the Council of Maintainers. But you know what? It may be a little bit of sound funny, but if it works, that's not crazy. So,
And actually, the nice thing, so if there were the right people were available to serve on this council, who had the right balance of subject matter expertise and really good people skills to manage everything, to try it out for 6 months or a year and see if it was useful. And if it's not useful, then try something else. But it's not the kind of thing that, like, contracts don't need to be, like, other than like being paid, like there's no contract with the maintainers themselves. It's we're available, like, leverage it if you'd like, kind of thing.
I think this is an interesting idea. We should explore.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to add in real quick, sorry, Joy, is the main thing is that all these things are intersectional, and like you can't have a lot of things, including security, unless a bunch of other variables work out well. Sorry, go on, Jory. I didn't mean to go.
No, it's giving me like just because to one point that I think you started to make, some of this is a technical problem and some of this is a human problem, right? Because people like yourself who have done a lot for their respective ecosystem by, providing all this support and labor and all that sort of stuff, aren't always like consulted or supported or reached out to when GitHub decides to do XYZ as a security measure. And so, like, and maybe that is a good thing, but they're not considering like how much of a lift that would be. And so, like, oh, here's a group you can reach if you're considering a change. You can test that idea out with this group of people. That's one idea. Another is, again, like, those folks kind of surfacing of the packages that we've brought into the world. These are the packages that we can take out of the world with and can get maybe help and resources from the respective package distros to handle. But I don't know, it's just still cogitating on this idea.
if it, I'm imagining a scenario where, like, for a GitHub issue, like something like, OpenSSF help or OpenSSF council call is kind of tagged in some way, that, because I'm not sure, like, I'm not sure if the help that's needed is a single, like, these fuzzing tests are broken, can someone look into this? Or like the form that the help would be needed, or, hey, I implemented a thing, does this look good to you? Or somebody reported a vulnerability to me, I don't understand what they meant by this. If it's the kind of thing that can be like dropped in help and then fly out, and maybe we're talking about completely different things, where one is a like open office hours for the internet, and the other one is dedicated, like, substantial help for certain projects.
Yeah, if I could jump in here real quick, and I did raise my hand. So I actually have a citation. So Census 2 actually reports some interesting status about how important a relatively small number of contributors are. So I'm just going to read the quote, but it's page 19, Census 2, Harvard, which Ella funded. So basically, look, 49 of the top 50 non-NPM projects, we looked at commits, 23 of the percent of the projects had one developer accounting for more than 80% of the code. 94 of the projects had fewer than 10 developers who accounted for more than 90%. And looking for the top 50 non-NPM, 136 developers were responsible for more than 80% of the lines of code. That's a snapshot, that's a piece. I'm sure that more now, this was, one attempt to quantify the question, but I think we have quite a bit of evidence for what Jordan said earlier, that there's a relatively small number of people who are making massive contributions, to which we need to say, A, thank you. That includes you, Jordan, so thank you. And B, we need to find a way to come alongside and help these awesome people. It may or may not be in Alpha Omega, but I think Alpha Omega has a part to play, but probably not the only part, and that's fine too.
Well, we are over time slightly. Are there any other comments anyone would like to make before we wrap it for this?
Yeah, there's one metric I would love to see Omega have in 6 months, and that is the coverage of projects being looked at, and being the coverage in the NPM ecosystem of, like, whatever that looks like. Of the top 1,000 most downloaded NPM projects, Omega is looking at 65% of them, or 50%. Or just watching that number go up and to the right is would make me feel really happy, And
well, I think also adding to it, out of not just the top 1,000, out of every single project on NPM, like, what percentage of download traffic is covered by OpenSSF?
For sure.
Would also
active
be interesting.
Projects. Actively downloaded projects. There you go.
Right.
But cool.
Love it. Thank you all very much. I really appreciate everybody's time. If you want to continue the conversation, join us on the Slack channel, or we'll chat again next month, and hopefully there'll be some news out before then. So,
do you have, Michael Scavetta and David Wheeler, do you have time to chat right now?